Nobody now needs to be convinced anymore than trade is a powerful engine for growth and economic development. The illustration was given by the Southeast Asia and India. So as far as African Export-Import Bank is concerned, we are going to continue to do the usual commodities financing and so on that we've been doing for many years. But we are now putting a very strong emphasis on what we call export development finance. Essentially, Africa has been exporting raw commodities. And we think that after 50 years of many African countries' independence, this should change. That is why we have this program of export development finance, which is targeted as changing the content of what we call African export. We've started with the extractive industries, with what we call indirect exporters. Essentially, service companies in the oil sector, in the mining sector. In Nigeria, for instance, we've put a facility together to empower domestic companies to be in a position to provide services to the oil majors. In Ghana, we've done a similar thing for the mining, for the gold. We've done similar thing in Zambia for the copper. These are examples of where we think things should change. And we are also working with government in order to have in place a proper export policy, because unfortunately, this doesn't exist in many countries. So these are the areas that we are working on. We are also working in Zimbabwe with the rehabilitation of the mining sector, because Zimbabwe is almost starting from scratch again. So, and then the tourism area. We really pride ourselves of being the only real Exim bank in the whole world. Why? Because in Africa, being the Exim bank for the continent, definitely we have to finance both export and import. Whereas in other Exim in the world, just promote export from their own countries. What I just talked about, which is the export development finance, actually before exporting, we will need to import the capital equipment that will enable you to be in a position to export. And the heart of the program is twinning with Exim India, Exim China, and US Exim, who will be providing the equipment so that African companies can now be in a position not only to provide those services, but also transform some of the African product. So to answer clearly to your question, yes, we have both sides where we will promote the export, but before promoting the export, we will equip African exporters with capital goods that will enable them to export. From the currency issue, I think it's a policy and political issue because there's been a long debate on having limited numbers of currencies. On the ECOWAS side, they have already the CFA working together, while the non-CFA should work on the convergence to get to one currency. But I think, like Arnold, that may be for the long run. In the Eastern Africa, too, there have been discussion under the SADC. But again, how much countries will be prepared to relinquish the sovereignty on that? I don't think the Greek example recently would help into that, because if Greek had the drachma, they would have just manipulated the money instead of having people in the streets. So people are having this kind of thoughts. To get to the issue raised by Leila, it's a discussion that we even had with ADB ourselves. Afrexim Bank is not a regulated institution because we are a multilateral institution. But for most of the regulated institutions, there are issues of capital, there are issues of liquidity. And the recent financial crises have shown that if you do not have some kind of backstop funding somewhere, then you are exposed. And in this regard, we had a strong support from ADB, who provided facility together with the IFC also, so that Africa's financial sector could respond to the growing needs of requests. To give you a typical example, our own, we used to have a pipeline of about $3 billion before the financial crisis. During the financial crisis, it packed up to $14 billion. $14 billion, meaning many of the African financial institutions who used to have facilities with international organizations had to now come to their own institution to look for money rather than to look for money in the international market where banks were not lending to each other. So I believe there's a strong role to play by institutions like ADB. ADB being the only AAA-rated financial institution in Africa, they have to have this kind of role.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.